共産主義者や左翼の連中が、自由意志は幻想だとか、意志や意識は最初から存在しないなどと言って、茂木健一郎氏や責任感のない元芸人が運営するサイトなども、科学者の言うことだからと、盲目的追従によって自由意志は幻想などと、大ボラを吹聴していたのに、いざ、人工知能の進化の話になると意識が発現する日も近いなどと言っているが、この変転はどうして起きたのか。今現在、自由意志について Google を参照すると、自由意志は存在する。ただし、ほんの 0.2 秒間だけというページが上位に出てくる。最近までは、共産主義者や左翼の連中が、自由意志は幻想だとか、意志や意識は最初から存在しないなどと言って、茂木健一郎氏や責任感のない元芸人が運営するサイトなどが、科学者の言うことだからと、盲目的追従によって自由意志は幻想などと、大ボラを吹聴していたのに、いざ、人工知能の進化の話になると意識が発現する日も近いなどと言っているが、この変転はどうして起きたのか。儲かればいいだけの、実に無責任なサイトが多く、さらに、視聴者数や登録者数を金銭で買って増やしているなど、回転寿司での不正行為から発展するような気質を持つから、元芸人のサイトは信用できない。これは、意思や意識が未だ定義されていないにもかかわらず、先行解説だけが先走っている現状だからである。それでは、自由意志は存在する。ただし、ほんの 0.2 秒間だけの提唱者は、ドイツベルリン大学附属シャリテ病院のジョン・ディラン・ハインズ教授という人物で、提唱したその根拠を調べてみよう。1980年代初頭に行われたリベット実験では、被験者に対して自分の思う時間に手首曲げをするように告げ、被験者にその手首曲げ実行決意が起きたら実験者に報告して、それと同時にその時の時刻を覚えて実験者に報告するよう要請した。それにより被験者の補足運動やから発せられる準備電位が、行為よりも約500ミリ秒早く活動を開始するという実験結果が得られた。多くの追試で確認されたので、唯物論者が意識ではなく、脳の無意識的、生物学的霊気が人間行動を決めると騒ぐのも、これが根拠になっている。ただ、任意の時間での何の制約もない手首曲げ実験では、被験者に手首曲げ決意が生じてもそれを拒否するだけの特段の理由がないのも、この実験の重要な点だ。ドイツベルリン大学附属シャリテ病院のジョン・ディラン・ハインズ教授は、被験者に手首曲げ決意が生じても、それを拒否するだけの特段の理由がない点と、一度決めた決意を撤回する点に着目し、米開拓史時代の決闘シーンを挙げた。決闘シーンでは、相手が銃を構える前に、自分が銃弾を発射するのは違反であり、これを応用して PC ゲームを作り、被験者を MRI に入れて実験し、その結果自由意志は否定されないと結論した。ゲームの概要は、被験者の目の前にある PC 画面中央に緑の表示が出たら、足付近にあるボタンを蹴って、任意でゲームを終わらせることができ、ポイントを獲得できる。赤マークが表示されていて、終了ボタンを押したら獲得しているポイントの一つを失う。このルールでゲームは開始し、実験は3段階で構成され、第1段階では、PC は緑赤マークをランダムに表示して、被験者の反応を予測する。第3段階では、第1第2段階で予測したであろう PC 予測の裏を書くよう、実験者は被験者に要請する。裏を返せば、被験者は自分が発信する準備電位を被験者自身でコントロールできるか否かを調べる実験だ。実験条件の違いにもかかわらず、いずれの段階でも準備電位発信に違いはなかった。第1段階では PC の緑赤マークランダム表示のため、被験者は、準備電位は未発信ながら、緑表示のため、被験者は PC 停止し、ポイントを獲得した。第1段階での被験者の勝率は 66.5%、第2段階では 31.9%、第3段階では 30.8%、第2段階第3段階で被験者の勝率が落ちるのは PC 予測が始動したことと、第3段階では被験者が PC 予測の裏を囲うと、準備電位の自己コントロールなど余計な努力をしたためと思われる。ちなみに、各段階とも準備電位に大きな変化はなかったとされるが、自己コントロールの可否については不明と記載されている。最後にはっきりしているのは、準備電位検知から早い時間での緑表示なら被験者の勝ち、準備電位検知から遅い時間での緑表示なら被験者の負け。言葉を言い換えれば、緑表示の時間が長ければ被験者が勝つ。説明すると、撤回や取り下げは即断では実行できない。リベット博士が任意の時間での何の制約もない手首曲げ実験で、被験者に手首曲げ決意が生じてもそれを拒否するだけの特段の理由がないから、運動やからの準備電位発信を使用したが、これは単純な機械信号のような運動神経系の特徴であり、これが終始一貫の決意から状況次第で撤回だとか左右いずれかだとかの多様な選択的手首曲げ実験に拡張すると、自由意志を考慮した運動神経の疎通や抑制系など多くの複雑さに変更する必要があるが、リベット博士はこれをせずに機械的な冷気信号で通したのがそもそもの失敗。人間や一般社会が持つ生物の死生観は間違っており、生物の個々の駆動活動は量子力学的な非局所性によって可能になる。人間が生物個体として活動できるのは、魚類が生物として動き回れる海水や塩分が必要なのと同様に、生命の始発活動は各個体の持つ活動エネルギーからの供給ではなく、この自然世界に厳然として存在する正規論あるいは半神論のような生命を躍動させるエネルギー相対あるいは自然全体の躍動エネルギーが供給源であり、それによって生物個体は生死を何回繰り返しても、その個体の生死のそれぞれはエネルギー相対によって供給され、生命源は共有され駆動されるのである。個体の生死のそれぞれは生死を繰り返すのではなく、その時期が来れば供給され停止される活動源によって生かされ死ぬのである。しかし、その生命活動は寿命のようになぜ有限なのか。さらに、この活動源は生命活動とともに自発性や自意識を付与する。それにより、個体としての活動が可能になるが、その要因は、投稿者には、量子力学的な作用によると考える。これは、人間に自由意志があるのか否かの議論で、無機質機械論者が、自由意志は幻想だと断言して、YouTube にもそれに追随する、軽はずみな多くの投稿がなされたが、よく考えれば、普通の生活を送る人間が、自由意志を行使する場面はかなり多く、それによって、自意識の成立は自然の働きそのものだが、自発性や意識そのものがどのように成立するのかは、現行の化学物理理論では説明できない。しかし、説明不能だからといって、それが幻想だと断言するのは、現行の化学物理理論が完璧に完成された理論だと、根拠もなく盲信し宣言することに等しい。と以前に投稿した。今回は、この自然世界に厳然として存在する正規論あるいは、半神論のような、生命を躍動させるエネルギー相対あるいは自然全体の躍動エネルギーが供給源であり、それによって、生物個体は、生死を何回繰り返しても、 その個体の精子のそれぞれはエネルギー相対によって供給され、生命源は共有され駆動されるのである。ならば、その生命を躍動させるエネルギー相対あるいは自然全体の躍動エネルギーは存在する上で、この自然に何らかの作用を及ぼすと考えても不都合ではない。投稿者は、それを重力と考えた。これは、ロジャー・ペンローズ今日の量子重力理論から引用したものでもない。量子重力理論は、一般相対性理論と量子力学の双方を統一する理論と期待されて登場したこともあり、物理学の基礎概念である、時間、空間、物質、力を統一的に理解するための鍵であり、物理学における最重要課題の一つと言われている。量子重力理論は、現時点では、全く未完成の未知の理論である。量子重力を考える上で、最大の問題点は、その指針とすべき基本的な原理がよくわかっていないということである。そもそも、重力は、自然界に存在する4つの力の中で最も弱い。したがって、量子化された重力が関係していると考えられる現象が、現在到達できる技術レベルでは観測できないためである。投稿者は、それを重力と考えた。これは、ロジャー・ペンローズ今日の量子重力理論から引用したものでもない。量子重力理論は、一般相対性理論と量子力学の双方を統一する理論と期待されて登場したこともあり、物理学の基礎概念である、時間、空間、物質、力を統一的に理解するための鍵であり、物理学における最重要課題の一つと言われている。量子重力理論は、現時点では、全く未完成の未知の理論である。量子重力を考える上で、最大の問題点は、その指針とすべき基本的な原理がよくわかっていないということである。そもそも、重力は、自然界に存在する4つの力の中で最も弱い。したがって、量子化された重力が関係していると考えられる現象が、現在到達できる技術レベルでは観測できないためである。投稿者がなぜ重力と考えたかというと、この大自然に一様に影響する重力が、生物個体の自発性や自己主体性を確立するとき、あるいは意思や意識として発現するとき、ボーズ・アインシュタイン凝縮からミニブラックホールの生成や特異点の存在など、その深遠な様相が何か関係しているように思えた。この大自然に一様に影響する重力ではあるが、生物各個体を成立させるのなら、各個体に影響する部分重力として働くかもしれないし、様相を一変させて働くかもしれない。1番目の映像は、エリフの副編集長である Tim・ベイレンス、イギリス、オックスフォード大学が司会を務め、そして、最初の研究者が研究発表を行いました。1、URI、マオズ、米国、チャップマン大学、重要な意思決定のための意思の脳科学。2番目の映像は、4年前に投稿されたリベット実験の評価です。いずれも、クリエイティブコモンズが宣言されている映像です。放送時間は40分です。
When people can't go to meetings. So I'm Tim Behrens and I'm Deputy Editor at eLife. And I'm a neuroscientist. And so today we're hearing from Uri Maus from Chapman Uni in the US, from Stefania Mattioni from UC Louvain in Belgium, and from Anantha Sundaramanan from Bristol in the UK. After each 10-minute talk, we're going to have 5 minutes question to.
So yes, my name is Uri Maus from Chapman University, as you were told, and I'll be talking about the neuroscience of volition for decisions that matter. Now, if I asked any one of you to raise one of your hands, you, of course, would be able to do so. And the order of events, as you probably experience it, is that you consciously decide which hand to raise, and then that causes you to raise your hand. So if you looked at the intuitive order of events, there's the conscious decision, then sometime later there's information in the brain about the action, and then there's the action itself. However, an experiment in the 1980s by Benjamin Libet and colleagues cast some doubt on that order of events. In that experiment, or at least one version of that experiment, Libet asked the participants to raise their hand whenever they had the urge to do so, and at the same time to look at a clock that had a rotating dot, and then just say where the dot was when they first had the urge to move or when they decided to move. So the dot started rotating, and then at some point they had the urge to move, and maybe they said that the dot was at 5 when they had the urge to move. Now, at the same time, EEG was recorded from the participant's scalp, looking at electric activity in the brain, and something called the readiness potential was calculated from that EEG, and that readiness potential is typically associated with voluntary movement. So this is here the readiness potential, this is where movement occurs, and maybe somewhere around here, something like 1 second before the movement, we would say from the readiness potential that we see something, there's some information in the brain about the upcoming action. However, where did people report that they had the urge to move or decided was around here, so about 200 milliseconds before movement onset. So the strange thing is what is going on in this time range here, because on the one hand, we already have, as we said before, information in the brain about the action, but the subject has not yet reported that they have decided to move. So is it the case that the decision was made unconsciously? So these Libet results caused quite a stir. They have been cited a few thousand times already, and they were mentioned widely in the lay press. And I should also note that they were not a fluke. This holds for if you ask people to raise one of their hands, or if you ask them to raise either one of their hands, so when to move or which hand to move, these precursors of movement were found actually much earlier using fMRI, even a few seconds before movement onset. They were found in single neuron recordings in humans as well, and we found some neural precursors of action even online in real time, so on the fly as things happen. So some people have concluded from those Libet results that the decisions in Libet experiments were made unconsciously. From that, they concluded that perhaps generally decisions are made unconsciously. And from that, it was suggested that, maybe this is a challenge for some of the social pillars, like our notion of free will and maybe even moral responsibility. If we are doing everything unconsciously, where is our free will and how are we morally responsible? So the thing I wanted to tell you about today is something that we've looked into regarding this arrow here. The thing that troubled us was that the Libet experiments, as I told you about them, were about raising your right hand or your left hand, or or flicking your wrist or something like that whenever you had the urge to do so. But we were wondering whether these results generalize to deliberate decisions. So deliberate decisions could be things that you deliberate about, which route to take to work in the morning, or more important life decisions, which job to take, life partner to choose, and so on. And we were wondering whether these arbitrary decisions and these more deliberate decisions are really the same. And this is work that I've done with collaborator Liad Mudrik and other collaborators. And what we've asked people to do is make donations to different nonprofit organizations, NPOs, and it doesn't matter. So then whatever button you press is completely arbitrary. So if we look at the neural recordings from that, we can see, if you look at the arbitrary decisions, we can see a downward trend that's reminiscent of the readiness potential. But we cannot see the same for deliberate decisions. We see it for arbitrary, we do not see it for deliberate. And the statistics seems to confirm what you see here. And if you look on average over all the subjects, you can see a nice readiness potential for arbitrary decisions, but just a slow downward trend that's not a readiness potential for deliberate decisions. And again, the statistics confirms this, what you see. We ran various control analyses to make sure that these results are not the outcome of some trivial, tweak or something like that, and they were not. And interestingly, we also looked at one more thing called the lateralized readiness potential. That's a potential that's more related to motor events. And there you see that arbitrary and deliberate decisions, there is no difference. So this really chimes in with the idea that the motor output here is the same between arbitrary and deliberate decisions. Further on, we worked with some modeling because recently there was a claim that this readiness potential is maybe actually artifactual. It might be due to autocorrelation in the EEG and with the specific method by which the readiness potential is computed from the EEG, rather than actually really being something that tells you that a voluntary action is about to occur. So we took that model that was done by Aaron Sugar and others in 2012, and we extended it to our case, and it fit our data quite well, and from that that model really predicted this slow downward trend in deliberate decisions, but to really see a readiness potential in arbitrary decisions. So to conclude from this, we would say that the neural signals that are associated with arbitrary decisions do not generalize to deliberate decisions, at least in our experiment. And if you think that the deliberate results pose a threat to our notion of volition, this threat doesn't seem, at least again from our results, to generalize to deliberate decisions. Now, I would arguably say that we care more about these deliberate decisions, the person you're going to live with, things that you think about, especially for a long time, than which hand you're going to raise. Certainly, if you want to talk about moral responsibility, nobody's going to take you to court for raising your right hand decisions to show that they do, because our results suggest that they do not. And this is just the paper that that was discussed here, if you want to look more into this. Of course, this was just a brief overview. Now, if I've piqued your interest into the neuroscience of volition, let me just say one more thing, that there is now a large international project that is happening looking into how the brain enables conscious causal control of action. We've got people from all over the world working together, neuroscientists and philosophers. You can see more information here. And
those are what were driving the decisions.
Right. So I didn't get into it, but we can actually, if you look at the consistency, and I guess this is what you're asking about, right? The consistency of the decision. So you can see that there is nice consistency for deliberate decisions, but there was, so I'll explain what I mean by consistency. I didn't go into it in the experiment, but there were two parts of the experiment. In the first part, subjects just rated on a scale of 1 to 7, each one of the nonprofits, how much they would want to donate $1,000 to it. And the consistency here is if something that was, let's say, a 3 came up with something that was a 7, you'd expect them to choose the 7 over the 3. So how consistent were they? So you can see that for deliberate decisions, the subjects were quite consistent. For arbitrary decisions, they were very close to chance. However, if you look at this cross here, they were slightly off chance. So they were just a little bit, yeah. So if something came up that you really don't like versus something you really like, even though it's arbitrary, it doesn't matter which button you press, it's going to go 50-50 to both of them, you still had a slight preference for the thing that you preferred.
And so, just while waiting, it seems to me that is it the case that the deliberate decision is less tied to an action somehow. So in fact, maybe you've got that here as well. So is it the decision that is it the case that the deliberate decisions are taking them longer, or somehow there's more delay between the decision and the action on the deliberate decision than there is, or
yes.
So for example, and so if that's the case, then your ERP can be smoothed over a longer period of time and won't show that. So let's say one trial is really rapid and the next trial takes a lot longer, then once you start averaging the trials together, it's going to be a very different thing from things that are very precisely timed, is it not?
So we've that's one of the controls that we did. We looked into, I mean, one concern that we had ourselves was this due to the reaction time differences? So we did various things to look into that. We took only the longer arbitrary trials and only the shorter deliberate trials, and you still see an effect between them. We also looked at whether there is a trend between the difference in the RP between deliberate and arbitrary, and we could not find an effect. And we did this both within subjects and between subjects, and there were no effects in both situations. So it seems that this does not explain our results. But yes, that was something that came up for us also as one of the first things that we checked, because if then it's less interesting. But again, this was not driving our results.
And yeah, cool, interesting. And so 0 here is the time when they actually make the action, right?
Yes, that's when they press a button. Yes. So
you would, in some senses, you would really expect there to be a build-up of brain activity in the deliberate decision before they make the action. So did you measure the time at which they report to have made the decision? Do you see what I mean?
So that's, I mean, so we didn't, and we didn't do that for two reasons. One, I don't think that right now there is a good measure of when people make up their mind. Libet's clock is a very flawed idea. There are some other things. We're actually trying to develop some of those things in my lab, but that's one reason. The other one was that we really wanted to try and keep this more like the real world. So it wasn't, I mean, asking people, when did you make up your mind, feels very unnatural to us. So we did not ask them when they made up their mind. But in other experiments, when we try to compare between arbitrary and deliberate decisions about when people make up their mind, we found some differences, but they were very small. They could not have, I mean, this was not like the 1 second difference that we see here. This could not have explained these results.
Cool. That's really interesting. So we're going to move on now, but thanks very much.
You're welcome to ask if you want to, of course.
So how do you think, if there's no build-up to a voluntary decision, what's happening in the brain that makes the decision then?
No. So I don't think the decision is made in the kidneys, but I mean, I think there is a buildup in the brain that leads to decision. I mean, if you run some kind of classifier on the brain, you can see that you can predict better and when you're closer to the decision. However, if you look at at some of the studies that have suggested that you can tell that what the decision is going to be a second in advance, or maybe even there's some studies that claim maybe even 10 seconds in advance, you can tell with better than chance that there's some information even 10 seconds in advance whether you're going to raise your left or your right hand. If you think about it, it's a little weird. So if the idea is that the brain doesn't know, but that there is clear information in the brain that the decision has been determined 10 seconds in advance. So what's the brain doing for 10 seconds? Just waiting for what exactly, right? So
or maybe I think the people that have said that have maybe suggested something else, which is something about the state of the brain has a probabilistic influence on what the actions are. Right? Isn't I mean, and so and those,
yeah, I mean, there are different interpretations, but and of course, I mean, even those studies that suggested. I'm sorry.
You could tell sort of. I guess you could tell 6 months in advance whether I'm going to choose to eat something hot and wholesome or something light and summery.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It's not all about prediction, of course. But there is, for instance, some information when we try to really look at predicting, I think a bit more carefully. it might be that you can really, that the prediction ability really rises just close to movement onset and not really well in advance of movement onset, as was thought, or at least as some people have claimed. So that's, I mean, one option is that. The other one is that even if it's not specifically the readiness potential that is predictive of upcoming movement, it could be that there are other things in the brain, that it's not, I mean, that specific signal is maybe not the right one. It's been known since at least 1965, and it's kind of like people are well versed in it, but it doesn't mean that that's necessarily where we need to look. It could be that there are other things in the brain that are more predictive of upcoming actions than the rest.
An action itself, but this decision isn't about the action. The decision is about the good or the charity, and so maybe it's those regions, that some different region, like the maybe frontal cortex rather than the action system, is making decisions about those in those different frames of reference, and maybe, and so you're just not detecting them with your particular sensor on the EEG. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So yeah, one thought that we have is it could be some ventromedial area or something like that is involved, and we're actually now trying to do an fMRI version of this similar experiment, an fMRI, to try and really see if there's something that's, as you said, it's just not accessible with EEG, and we could find the information there. Again, I really think we're going to find the information somewhere in the brain. It's not just coming out of the blue, but it seems, at least from our results, it seems to be not the readiness potential that's the important thing here. And I think, again, more than just saying that this is readiness potential or not, I think it's just this idea that arbitrary and deliberate decisions are not the same. And the fact that you can predict, I mean, if you think about it, if you can predict if I'm going to raise my left hand or my right hand, all you need to do is basically, I mean, there needs to be some kind of symmetry broken in the brain. Yeah. So if you're, the fact that you can do some kind of symmetry breaking, that maybe even something like the readiness potential is just a matter of symmetry breaking, you need more than that to predict a deliberate decision, right? Then there's values that go into that, and deliberation back and forth and so on. So we were just trying to highlight, and hopefully we did it in a good manner, to highlight that there are these differences between arbitrary and deliberate decisions. And the fact that you can maybe predict an arbitrary decision doesn't immediately mean that all decisions are like that. And hopefully, if I convinced anybody of anything, maybe I've convinced you of that. So I've done that. I've done my job.
And so Stefania, how do we? So it seems like as you move away from anterior to LOC or something like that, we're going to need a different way of thinking about the organization of the anterior parts of the infratemporal cortex. How are we going to get that? What are we going to like as you move towards the hippocampus? We're going to come with questions now. So if you guys don't have questions for each other, then I think we should wrap up. Thanks very much again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
投稿者は金儲け目的で投稿しているわけではないから、視聴者の増減を気にすることはない。投稿の目的は、投稿者の達成感を得ることが第一であり、投稿自体を仕事にすることはない。なぜなら、投稿内容は、時代を切り開く役割のために、新規かつ斬新なものにならざるを得ず、そんなアイデアを毎日創出できるほど、投稿者の脳は常習的、機械的ではない。